This will be our final lecture on Aristotle. It will cover the Nicomachean Ethics, books 2 through 10. We have spent quite a bit of time making our way through Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, book 1, chapters 1 and 2. We will not have the time to make our way through Aristotle's entire work with the same close reading, paragraph by paragraph, but I do want to briefly go over some of the major themes that dominate the rest of the Nicomachean Ethics. Book 1 has taught us quite a bit about how Aristotle understands human nature, virtue, and the good life. But it has also raised many questions for us. Among these important questions are questions such as these. How does one develop into a good person who is able to understand the virtuous life and follow the golden mean? What kinds of things can go wrong as I develop from a child without self-awareness to an adult who makes choices that are in line with virtuous action? What types of rationality are essential for living the virtuous life? What are the specific virtues beyond courage and moderation in pleasure, and what do they look like in human action? And is virtue something I pursue alone, or are good friends necessary for the good life? Each of these issues will be addressed in turn in this lecture. The basic childhood foundation for an ethical life. Part of this story for Aristotle is not an entirely happy one. Aristotle believes that some people will be raised in such a way that they are not taught good habits, not taught to moderate their desires, not taught rationality or self-control. For these people, who have no foundation for the good life, Aristotle fears that they may never have the basic skills necessary to take control of their lives and to learn to make the decisions that will lead to a life of happiness. In our contemporary society, we have a greater faith in the ability of people to change, even after extreme disadvantage in youth, but Aristotle was not so hopeful. Either way, it is important that parents and other mentors and guardians, as well as the government and community, provide youth with the basic foundation of the ethical life. According to Aristotle, we should be raised with good habits, taught to respond correctly to situations, and taught to have the right emotional responses. Moving from being raised well to being truly ethical. When I become old enough to choose for myself, as my rationality develops and I begin to learn about the world and myself from my own experiences, Aristotle believes the beginnings of the true ethical life of the individual emerge here. It is here that we take the foundation we were provided in youth and adjust the things that we were taught to fit into our own insights and experiences. Even the best mentors cannot give us rules that will apply without exception to our own experiences. You will recall that for Aristotle, what counts as virtuous activity for me is always relative to my individual character and my individual social situation. My experience and understanding of myself help me to adjust the habits and knowledge I was raised with and to fit the truth into my own personality and social world. Ways in which our ethical development can fall short. Aristotle does not believe that everyone will be able to move equally effectively from a good childhood foundation to a virtuous and happy life. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 7, Aristotle discusses several ways in which this process might go wrong, leaving us short of our ethical goal. Continence. The continent person does the right thing, but must struggle to overcome a desire not to do the right thing in order to act correctly. We often think of moral heroes as people who overcome their negative dispositions to do the right thing, even though it was against their disposition. A dispositionally unkind person who still works hard to be nice to people, or a greedy person who still shares because it is the right thing to do, might be thought of as moral success stories for us. But for Aristotle, virtue is the key, and a virtuous person is the person who habitually does the right thing as the result of a good disposition and with the right attitude. The virtuous person is made happy by acting in the right way, and their attitudes and actions are in harmony with each other. The virtuous actions that they take are a reflection of who they are, what they desire, and what they value. For these reasons, the merely continent person, who has the willpower to do what is right, but must fight their desires to do what is wrong in order to do what is right, is not the fully enlightened or virtuous person. What do you think about this? Should I be considered virtuous as long as I do the right thing and it has good consequences for people? Or do I only get credit for being virtuous if I acted in the right way out of a good attitude and desire to do what was right? We will see the utilitarians, who we will discuss later in this course, will side against Aristotle by saying that, as long as the consequences are good, the reason for the action is not morally relevant. Incontinence. A second of these shortcomings, farther from virtue for Aristotle, is incontinence. For the incontinent person, strong desire or emotion will stop that person from following through with what is rational. The typical case of the incontinent person is one who may reason well and understand what is right to do, but that person's willpower is too low, and their desires are too great. For this reason, even though they understand the right thing to do, and they want to do what is right, their desire to act in ways that are inappropriate are too strong for them to live a fully virtuous life. For example, if someone offends you by a small action, you might realize that letting it go is the virtuous thing to do, or perhaps responding with a small rebuke. But if our anger is too strong, we might respond with a disproportionate attack, or even with violence, when violence is not called for, and a more controlled response might dissipate the conflict. In another form of incontinence, a person may be so overcome by passion that they act before they finish reasoning about what is right and wrong and making a good choice. The incontinent person is not truly evil because they did not deliberately choose to do wrong. Instead, their passion overwhelmed their ability to act reasonably, and so they are not fully virtuous. Aristotle is again disagreeing with his teacher Plato here. Plato believed that if we truly understand what the right thing to do was, that we would always be fully motivated to act on the right thing. If we made a bad choice, according to Plato, it was always because it seemed like the right thing at the time, because our anger, for example, clouded our rational thinking and made it seem like getting into a fight was the right thing to do. Aristotle believed that a person without a strong enough will might get pulled into a fight knowing it was wrong, but being unwilling to overcome their anger and to do the right thing. Evildoers. The continent person does the right thing, but with the wrong attitude or disposition. The incontinent person knows what is right and tries to do it, but is overcome with desire, and so does the wrong thing. Aristotle reserves the title such as vice and wickedness for those who do not consider what the virtuous life requires at all, and who do the wrong thing out of choice because they want to do it. The self-indulgent person, for example, acts on their desires with no consideration for virtue, moderation, or ethical consequences. In this sense, they are farthest from the virtuous life, because they do the wrong thing. They do it because they choose to. They do not succumb to wrong behavior because their desires are too strong to resist. Intellectual virtues. Aristotle divides the virtues into intellectual and moral virtues. Most of what we think about when we think about ethics falls under the domain of moral virtues. But we have also seen that rationality is a key component of the fully virtuous life for Aristotle. Even if I know all of the individual virtues, like courage and generosity, I still need the intellectual virtues to figure out how to use those traits in a truly virtuous way. One important intellectual virtue for Aristotle is practical wisdom. Part of practical wisdom is being able to rationally figure out, for example, that moderation is a virtue, But even after I have figured out the virtues in an abstract sense, I still need practical wisdom to apply those abstract virtues to the real world and to understand the consequences of my own actions. Practical wisdom, phronesis. Let's think back to the person who got into a fight over unkind words. The abstract knowledge that I should be moderate in my anger is important to know, but that is not really enough for me to know how to act when someone threatens me in a public space. The person with practical wisdom will understand the consequences of getting into a fight, understand the level of threat that is being presented to them, and have the intelligence to choose the right action that will result in the best consequences and lead to the happiest life. If my life is truly in danger and I don't have the practical wisdom to figure it out, then I might sacrifice my life or that of others from being too passive. If my life was not truly in danger and a quick joke could have diffused all of those tensions, then I might needlessly sacrifice my life because I did not understand the situation correctly or have the wisdom to know how to diffuse the conflict. Even when we are deliberately trying to help others, as a reflection of our positive attitudes, we may lack the practical wisdom to know how to help. Generous, quote-unquote, teachers may pass a student to the next grade trying to build up his self-esteem and avoid a hurtful truth. But that attempt at generosity may lack practical wisdom because that student will suffer repeatedly for being in a situation where they are unable to complete their work. In a similar way, a generous friend might decide not to confront another friend in order to spare that friend's feelings, only to realize later that issues as serious as this can lead to drastic consequences. This practical wisdom to understand both what virtue is and how to apply it to everyday situation is not a set of rules and cannot be taught directly to us, but the virtue can be modeled by virtuous people around us, and we can gain this wisdom from what we observe around us and even from our own mistakes. Theoretical wisdom, or Sophia. Aristotle points out the importance of practical wisdom in making real decisions and applying our knowledge to real-life action, but some remarks in the Nicomachean Ethics point strongly to his belief that the highest life for humans is actually the pursuit of what is purely theoretical, such as the divine movement of the stars and planets. Even though this knowledge is useless in everyday matters, Aristotle believes, perhaps paradoxically, that studying purely theoretical philosophical issues is the highest life for humans. God, for Aristotle, is the happiest creature because he thinks only about the highest things. Humans, on the other hand, must think about practical matters much of the time because we have human bodies, and we must live in a real social environment with other imperfect people. Aristotle's Catalogue of Virtues. In Book 4 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle gives us what is sometimes referred to as his Catalogue of Virtues. This is the most practical part of his book, where he lists the particular virtues and gives advice on how to adhere to the virtues and how to identify them. 11 of the virtues in particular stand out here, and each will be briefly discussed. Courage is avoiding cowardice without falling into rashness. This virtue has already been much discussed by us. Temperance is avoiding especially indulging in taste and touch and sacrificing more important things for these, but also being sure to find pleasure in actions that are healthy. Liberality, or generosity, is taking and giving in the right amounts. The prodigal person takes from anyone and gives to anyone, while the stingy person has an excess in taking and a deficiency in giving. Magnificence, or appropriate spending. One does not spend too little on important or beautiful things if they are magnificent. At the same time, one does not spend too much on things that are unimportant or unworthy. Pride. The prideful person finds satisfaction in their truly noble deeds. At the same time, the prideful person does not overestimate or underestimate his nobility or ability. Honor. The person who is honorable pursues what is respectable, but not at the cost of good sense. And for the sake of their own character they pursue honor, and not for the respect of others. Good-temperedness. The person who is good-tempered is angry only with good justification, and not angry because they have a bad temper. The person with good-temperedness is also not unaware of wrongs that are done to them, nor are they unwilling to defend someone who has insulted them unfairly. Sociability. The person who is sociable supports others and tries to please them when he can, but also avoids supporting others when it is not appropriate. The person who is sociable also, as Aristotle puts it, avoids finding it his duty to oppose absolutely everything. Modesty. The person who is modest is not boastful, but the person who is modest is also not dishonest about his own achievement and accomplishments. Finally, wittiness and justness. The person who is witty is clever and tactful, at the same time not buffoonish, vulgar, or mean with their humor. The person who is witty also avoids the extreme of being without humor. Justness. The person who is just does what tends to preserve the happiness and its components for political society. The just person does not follow laws blindly and does not ignore the rules for purely selfish reasons. Justice, as Aristotle puts it, wraps up all the virtues into one. The importance of friendship. Friendship, says Aristotle in Book 8 of the Nicomachean Ethics, is a virtue, or at least implies virtue, and it makes life worth living. Here's a quote from the first paragraph of Book 8. After what has been said, a discussion of friendship would naturally follow, since it is a virtue or implies virtue, and is besides most necessary with a view to living. For without friends, no one would choose to live, though he had all other goods. Even rich men and those in possession of office and of dominating power are thought to need friends most of all. For what is the use of such prosperity without friends? Or how can prosperity be guarded and preserved without friends? Three kinds of friendship. Aristotle claims that friendships are of three kinds. Some kinds of friendships are friendships of utility. In a friendship of utility, each person gets something useful from the other person. He gives the example of a host and a guest. A guest needs a place to stay, and a host perhaps needs someone to look up to and to admire him. This friendship will last for as long as the host allows the guest to live with him, and as long as the host feels flattered by the guest. Other friendships are for the sake of pleasure. In this category, Aristotle puts two young people who fall passionately in love with each other. The two lovers provide each other with pleasure, but because this friendship is based on pleasant emotion, the friendship dissolves when the lovers no longer find each other pleasant. Aristotle also discusses in this category people who love someone because the other person is funny. If I make a friend with someone because they make me laugh, I will stay friends as long as they please me with good jokes. Perfect friendship. The third and perfect kind of friendship for Aristotle is a friendship of virtue. In a virtuous friendship, two virtuous people come together as equals to help each other for the sake of the other person. They see in the other person the virtue that they themselves strive for, and they admire and support the virtue of the other person. The friendship of virtue is also pleasant and useful. It is pleasant because the virtuous person is a happy and fulfilled person, and a happy and fulfilled person is someone you will enjoy being around. It is also useful because a virtuous person will help his friend and do so for the sake of his friend. This also explains why the friendship of virtue is a lasting friendship. If we are both trying to support each other, and we are both striving for a life of virtue, we will have good habits, stay content, and be reliable partners with our virtuous friends. By contrast, the friendship of utility or of pleasure is only a selfish friendship, so it dissolves when I am no longer being served. It is also an unvirtuous friendship, and the unvirtuous person does not have the consistent habits of goodness toward others nor toward himself. Should I love myself? Aristotle also brings up what seems like a very modern question. Should we love or have a friendship with ourselves? Aristotle says that the virtuous person will be amicable or friendly towards themselves as well as toward others. This is because the virtuous person loves virtue, and so they will be pleased to find virtue in themselves as much as in another. On the other hand, the unvirtuous person cannot love themselves. Consider, for example, the incontinent person. Aristotle says that the incontinent person, who knows the right thing but cannot get themselves to do it, will be disappointed and frustrated with themselves, and so they will not love themselves. In a similar way, the person of virtue will treat the unvirtuous person with virtue, but will not form true friendships with them, because the true friend loves the character of another person, and a virtuous person is attracted to a virtuous character. Aristotle points out that a person can't quite be friends with themselves, since friendship implies more than one person. But for Aristotle, the virtuous person will like themselves, and the only way to learn to truly love oneself, or to be worthy of friendship of others, is to develop a character of virtue.